Israel has destroyed most of Gaza and has also been starving its people since breaking the last ceasefire in March. Medieval tactics of siege deliberately deny Palestinians many of the essentials needed for human health and survival. All this in full glare of the world, the story of Gaza's horror being told by its journalists, themselves starving too. How this could happen in today's world will shame those responsible when the pages of history are read by future generations. But for the people of Gaza, that's too late. For them, the health consequences of such planned, organised starvation will blight the lives of an entire generation. Exploring this in detail is central to finding out what's behind Israel's policy of starvation and what it's doing to the health and lives of Palestinians in Gaza.
In March, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered a blockade of all aid into Gaza. And his government says there is no hunger, denying what international aid agencies and governments are saying, that this is a man-made disaster.
Dr. Nick, you have been to Gaza, I believe, 3 times during the war since October 2023, but you've just come back in the last week. Compared to your previous visits, how much worse has it got?
Hello, thank you for asking me on. It's much worse. I've seen malnutrition on all 3 trips since October 2023. And each time I go, I feel I'm going to be prepared for what I'm going to see because I know Gaza so well. I've been going there for 15 years. I have been in regular contact with friends and colleagues out there. But of course, each time I go is much, much worse than I expected. On this most recent occasion, I have spent a month out there. I returned 4 days ago. The malnutrition in particular, I mean, many things are worse, but the malnutrition in particular was really quite appalling. Patients of mine died as a result of their malnutrition because of their inability to heal following the major injuries and the major surgery they were requiring. I had children on the pediatric intensive care unit. Children up there were dying. So the malnutrition was really unimaginably bad and much worse than I'd expected.
The reason that's the case is because malnutrition impacts all aspects of the body's function. It's the fuel for your cells. And so when your cells are starved, it impacts essentially every organ in your body. We, I guess, colloquially think of it as, low energy, not enough sugar to burn as energy, and then you lose fat, and then you lose protein, and you end up losing weight and looking quite thin. But in reality, all of the cells in your body are altered by this. In your intestines, the villi, so the cells lining your intestines, die. And that results in issues with absorption, bacterial overgrowth. Your pancreatic suffers, so you struggle. Pancreas suffers, so you struggle absorbing fats. And that means that even when you're fed, you can't necessarily absorb the calories. You end up with diarrhea and losing a lot of fluids. The cells in your heart become very weak and thinned, and they have poor contractility. Their connections are also impacted so that the heart rate slows quite a bit. And these children often die of heart failure or life-threatening changes in rhythm, even during the period where they're being, and sometimes especially during the periods that they're being refed. They also have life-threatening shifts in salts. And these can also lead to fatal heart rhythms. They're more prone to, everything life-threatening from sepsis, as someone just mentioned right now, to shock. I think it was Dr. Ahmed that mentioned that the baby, I think her name was Zainab, also had sepsis. So sepsis, shock, other infections, including skin infections, particular ulcerating skin lesions, low blood pressure, inability to maintain body temperature, so hypothermia, fluid overload, especially when you're refeeding, fungal infections, acute vitamin deficiencies that threaten even your vision, can cause alterations in your bone growth for children, and so on. And then, of course, for your brain, which is the long-term impact that we talk about a lot, for your brain, it can result in death of brain cells, alterations in, so a reduction in the number of brain cells, alterations in the way they branch, in the connections between them, all of which results in decreased brain size, slowed brain growth, and ultimately delays in motor function, in global function, in memory. And so that when they do studies of adults who were treated for severe acute malnutrition as children, and so they underwent rehabilitation, they often find that they have issues with education, vocabulary, learning difficulties. And recently there was a study actually in April in the British Medical Journal that followed adults that were treated as children. And they had issues with everything from mobility to their social networks, to their social participation, to household daily tasks, and et cetera. And
okay.
Gaza's
population. If I could bring in Dr. Nick again now, Dr. Tanya. As I understand it, just reintroducing food will not fix some of these children. There is a point that they reach. I think Tanya mentioned it. There's this thing, refeeding syndrome. Are you worried about that in Gaza, even if food was to arrive?
Absolutely, and we saw it all the time, and we saw it in a lot of the adults I was treating as well. It leads to very severe electrolyte or biochemical abnormalities in the blood, which, as Tanya said, can cause severe dysrhythmias of the heart, can cause the heart to go into a very fast rhythm, might even cause the heart to stop working. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened with the young girl Habiba, who died yesterday morning, tragically. The other thing to add in is, and it's linked to what Tanya was saying, that the immune system is so suppressed in these patients that their ability for their tissues to heal following the major trauma they've had and following the major surgery we've carried out is greatly impaired. So if they're very malnourished to start with, we might do this very major surgery to repair their liver or their pancreas or their duodenum or their intestines or their stomach. And because they're so malnourished, the ability of those tissues to heal properly is often very, very diminished. So those repairs we've done will then break down, causing terrible infections, terrible leakages of bodily contents into the abdomen, into the chest. That causes more infections. That stops, for example, the intestine working. So you cannot use the intestine for nutritional support, which means they need to have intravenous feeding, and that is impossible in Gaza. So you get these people get into a vicious cycle and often die.
If Israel allowed aid in at scale now, could things be turned around or not? Is it too late?
So Israel is obliged, actually legally obliged, to provide a full spectrum of unhindered humanitarian access and restoration of basic services: food, water, sanitation, hygiene, fuel, medical care, etc. It is a requirement for it to do that, to be in conformity with its obligation to prevent genocide. And as with every passing day, the actual steps that Israel needs to take to conform to that obligation are getting higher and higher and higher. It is not simply enough to airdrop a little bit of food, to set up this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and distribute some rations at the southern edge of Gaza, which, as we know, are death traps. A fully comprehensive program of humanitarian specialist medical care is needed in order to stop this, what is already a catastrophe, from spiraling completely out of control. Everything that's on offer today is just like the smallest beginning in that step.
Tanya, I mean, we've talked about the physical effects of the famine and the starvation and the effects on those who may even survive. There clearly are psychological effects as well. What would you say, given that you deal with children, will be the effect on this generation of people in Gaza, the lasting effect?
I don't know. I've described some of the patients I treated before, but this last time I was in Gaza, most of the children I treated in the ICU weren't interactive at all. After they had recovered and we had taken the breathing tubes out, children often stared at the wall. The children that we had with burns that would come in would not cry. They wouldn't ask for food. They often wouldn't even ask for their parents. All of this is not normal behavior for a child. I have a friend who's a specialist in child mental health, and we have conversations about this all the time because she's also going to Gaza frequently, and nothing about the way children are reacting at the moment is normal. But at the same time, even though this is unprecedented, and at least in my career, I've never treated a child that's been through what the children in Gaza have been through in the last 2 years. It's kind of, I guess, expected. I mean, when you're in the emergency department, you can imagine what the children who are brought in injured and still conscious are seeing around them. And that's what I'm mostly exposed to. So it's hard for me to talk about children in the community. In the hospital, the children are seeing people around them injured in ways that are so horrific that even as healthcare providers, we walk away changed. So I don't know.
Let me bring in Nick about that point, walking away changed. You were just days ago in Gaza. You're now in Oxford, known as one of the places of education, one of the most civilized places in the world. The contrast to the way people are being treated in Gaza. I know you're a medical professional, but are you angry?
Most certainly, and I know I've spoken to Tanya about this. When you leave Gaza, you have this very complex mix of many deep emotions coming out. You clearly feel a bit of relief. You're coming home to see your loved ones, but you feel intense anger because of what has been done to the Gazans and how profoundly unjust and evil it is. You feel guilt for leaving because you're leaving patients behind, you're leaving friends and colleagues who are being left to work there, don't have the luxury of getting out again. And that's all magnified when you get back to what is normal living for us, when you get back to your home and you see how everyone can live outside Gaza. So a very complex mix of emotions, but absolutely anger is paramount in that. And again, particularly in the UK, because our government has done nothing to help the Gazans, and they're all talking a lot at the moment. They're all coming out with very strong words, but not taking any actions at all. So that makes me very angry indeed.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our guests today.